Under President Biden, Americans have been consistently experiencing a detrimental impact to their pocketbooks through inflation. And the polls indicate that Americans believe that they are worse off under this scenario than the previous administration. The answer seemed to be to reduce inflation, or was to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. Mr. DeBoer, do you believe that the Democrat legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the American Rescue Plan actually succeeded in lowering inflation and ultimately interest rates?
Well, I'd like to leave it to others on that point, but I will say that raising interest rates applied primarily to the commercial real estate industry and car buyers. Much of the economy was not even subject to interest rates going up. Education, the spending under the infrastructure bill, and other things. Do I think that bill lowered inflation? I don't know. To the extent maybe it opened up the supply chain problem.
Mr. Waddell, do you believe that that the Inflation Reduction Act lowered inflation?
I can't speak to the Inflation Reduction Act. Our industry is benchmarked mainly off of short-term interest rates and the 10-year Treasury, and we're still kind of suffering through the rate increases there and the inflation in the cost of mortgages.
So, okay, so let's dive into that then. So we're experiencing higher interest rates than before. Either one of you can chime in that how is that having an economic impact on your industry?
I could jump on that one. I mean, from a mortgage finance perspective, it's pretty simple, and it's consistent with what's happening in the residential side. It seems as if a lot of existing mortgage rates are about 4%. The current market, let's call it 6.5%. And that's a major adjustment. You can't qualify for the same amount of leverage, and the leverage costs more. So when people come to us for a loan, we're often coming up with less proceeds than they need at a higher cost. And that's the transition the industry is going through.
I think that also there's so many mortgages that were originated in the period of historically low interest rates that are now coming up to be refinanced, and there's 500 basis points roughly higher on the Fed funds rate. Yeah. That makes it very, very difficult to refinance commercial mortgages under this environment.
So that's a good question, because we've experienced this before where we've had a cliff. I mean, do you see this as a cliff effect where you've got a lot of commercial loans that are now hitting their expiration date or coming up for renewal, and they're going to have a dramatic increase in their interest rates? Do you see?
I would not necessarily term that issue as a cliff. It's more of a slow-moving train wreck. As these mortgages come up, they're restructured. The meetings are going on with lenders. Some aren't going forward, some are. So as it kind of builds up, it's not an overnight problem, I guess I would say.
The mortgages that are maturing this year, I mentioned the word vintages, and they come from all different vintages. A lot of our industry operates off a 10-year mortgage as a convention on kind of the longer term, and then some operate on bank loans off a 3-year. So for example, we'll have a 10-year loan from 2014 maturing this year in 2024, as well as a 3-year loan from 2021 maturing this year in 2024. And they tend to have very different characteristics. The one that's been in place longer probably has more margin. The one that just came into effect a few years ago doesn't have the margin. So there's a mounting maturity, but the maturities aren't the same.
So we're seeing a softening. Are we seeing a softening in the industry from demand because of the e-commerce move to have people work from home as well?
I think there's substantial question in the office market about future office needs, but the occupancy has been going up. On interest rates, I'd also say just because the rates went up, the values are coming down. So refinancing those mortgages at the number that they were originated in is going to be very, very difficult without a lot of equity and new capital going into that product. This is a very self-fulfilling prophecy. As rates go up, values go down, concentrations are decided to be lessened, and values go down again. So,
real quick, last question is, how do you see this comparing to what we experienced in 2008?
Well, 2008, you want to take this, Jeff? I would say, I think in 2008, arguably, there were a lot of loans that may have been originated that were not, let's say, conservatively underwritten, and maybe never should have been written in the first place, that were coming due, that clogged up the plumbing within the financial system. That's not what's happening here. These mortgages were issued in a conservative basis. Markets were largely imbalanced when they were done. They've been thrown out of balance because high interest rates and a change in the demand side of things primarily. So I don't see them as all that equal.